Hello, and welcome to the first editor's desk. My name is Monique Curry Mims, and I am the editor in chief of Generosity. And I am here with
I'm Dio Peterson. I am the managing editor of Generosity, and it's lovely to be here.
So we got together, like as a team, and we were like, you know what? We want to have conversations about narratives and issues that were coming up and stories that were being pitched to us and things that we were covering, and also provide an opportunity to engage with people around these issues. So there are comments, so you can put stuff into the comments and we will try to address them as we go through. Forgive me if I look down, it means I'm checking for your comments. But today, Dio and I are going to talk about community narratives. Hopefully, you guys were able to check out today's publication of Generosity, which focused on insights from Health Sparks Housing Summit, which focused on narratives around those unhoused and housing issues and affordable housing and NIMBYism. So we're going to dive a little bit into that, but also want to just talk about Dio, who is our community narratives extraordinaire. So Dio, let's talk about community narratives.
Oh, that's my favorite topic in the whole wide world. So, where I was last, I was with Resolve Philly, and during my tenure there, my goal was to build a program around community narratives, which basically invited people who don't normally get invited into the public discourse to have their voices heard. And I think the traditional means of doing that is a reporter connects with a community member and says, "Yes, I can help be the vehicle for your story." Um, that is fantastic, obviously. In my opinion, I think narrative empowerment for folks whose voices have been historically marginalized and oppressed really takes the form of support and equipping individuals to actually tell their stories themselves. So that's the concept behind community narratives, is giving the support and equipping a community member with whatever tools they actually need, whether it's editorial support, some kind of like close one-on-one education, someone to go help guide them through like editorial process and compositional process, even like the most basic and logistical things
Mhm.
that a person would need in order to be brought up to what they call newsroom standard and actually have a place in the public discourse. So obviously, like, community narratives is a really important topic for me. It's like my favorite thing to talk about, and I think it means a lot. Like, I say community narratives a lot, but
Mhm.
what I'm really referring to is narrative sovereignty. And I
Mm.
really hope that that phrase catches on and spreads like wildfire, um, because like that resonates, right? Narrative sovereignty is just the ownership of the story of your own experiences, the circumstances of your existence, your time here. It is your ability to own that narrative and own that story. And that's important
Yeah.
because, people can weaponize narrative against other people all the time, and they do.
Yeah.
Weaponize narrative against entire groups all the time in order to disenfranchise them, in order to disempower them. And so having narrative sovereignty makes it a lot less likely that your narrative can be weaponized against you. And also, I think it's a perfect vehicle for empathy. There's very few more effective ways to connect one person to another than by getting that pure, unadulterated storytelling, that like narrative connection. It's a great way to get people to understand one another and connect with one another very quickly, because we
Very
have a lot
quickly.
more in common than we do difference. So that's community narratives in a nutshell.
No, I love that because I think that, on the opposite of weaponizing, we actually get stuck in narratives. Like we have these narratives that are misconceptions around an issue,
Yep.
around people, and being able to have that sovereignty, to be able to tell your own story and to share it from your perspective allows for other people who are utilizing or weaponizing those narratives to be able to produce solutions that actually meet or rise to the occasion, I'll say. And I
Yeah.
think that we all have a narrative, right? Like we all have a narrative, and sometimes it is based in biases. But when you're looking at a situation, it is multifaceted, right? So there has to be an ability to share what you're thinking, share what you are experiencing, and finding that truth in the middle where we can all move forward together.
Absolutely.
So, community narratives has been a big part of Generosity's kind of like, I don't wanna say rebranding, but relaunching over the next year, over the last year, and bringing you on was a big part of that. You know, with community narratives, because we are the outlet that nonprofits and foundations and government leaders, these social impact leaders are reading, or at least one of them,
Yeah.
we wanna be able to inform our writing through the lens of the people that they're serving, right? If you're putting dollars and programs and policies in communities, you need to be listening to what the community is saying, understanding how you're being impacted by it. So we always try to do it from that lens. So now that you're here, and thank goodness for being here. Thank you. Like in front of everybody, like I know I've done that, but like thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Um, how has how is your work going to evolve, right? Like, it was one thing at Resolve or previous, Lee, understanding what we're doing at Generosity, what do you hope to actually grow here and bring here?
Mm. Well, I think like the crux of community narratives really is about relationship building.
Mhm,
And in the early iterations of community narratives, really like that through line grew very, very strong. And I did have a lot of opportunity for not just close one-on-one editorial work, but also exploring how community narratives work can be like a practice of care.
mm,
Because there was so much in the approach that had to be trauma informed, that
yeah,
had to be caring and collaborative and communicative, simply because when you're talking about people whose voices or inputs have been historically marginalized, some of what you're talking about in these narratives are things that are traumatizing or are things that are hurtful for a person to relive. And so approaching it not just as a like let's do what we got to do to get this story, more like a like let's connect as people, let's like hold each other's hand through this and explore really what this narrative means and how it resonates. So that's how it started, and that I think is that's the continuous through line. Like that relationship building crux is never going to go anywhere. So I think where I would really like to go with community narratives next
mhm,
is widen that like really ramp up that relationship building part. And some of that involves gaining access to communities that maybe like are not going to find their way to me. They're for whatever reason they're not going to be like, oh, I'm going to go see my friendly neighborhood community narratives person. Maybe there are ways that I can actually show up for, and I'm my brain wants to think of specific groups, but like literally I could start naming groups and never ever stop
right,
because there are just so many individuals, people who do have stories, who are not hearing this message, who aren't active on online platforms, who don't have access to live streams, who are not hearing this message that they're being invited to come and join the public discourse, that Dio wants to talk to them. And so I think a lot of what this next phase of work is going to be is really exploring how to get into those places, how to gain access to communities who don't feel like they have access to me. And that can mean a lot because if we're talking specifically about like folks who are experiencing homelessness, right? You
mhm,
can't just go bebopping into encampments or, shelters carelessly and
right,
well-meaningly. Because like well-meaning is not the same as well thought out, and sloppy can do a lot of harm too. And so even just positioning myself in such a way where I'm expanding these relationships is going to require a great deal of planning, is going to require a great deal of care, is going to require a great deal of training, and I'm looking forward to doing all of that and really just creating opportunities outside of like really digging into certain spaces, just
mhm,
creating opportunities to open up spaces and talk to people, connect with folks and have them connect with one another. We do a lot of that with the pop-up newsrooms. That
yeah,
feels like a ready-made opportunity to just have community members and invested people in the same space and continue that work of collecting these narratives and invite people to take it a little further. Do you want to work with someone to flesh out a much larger story? I got you. I'm your person. Like it's really limitless. And it just takes being there, being where the people are. So that's what I look forward to, definitely.
no, that's pretty dope. Being where the people are. I mean, so we did some curated newsrooms in the first, I guess, like 2 quarters of the year, and
Mhm.
then we started doing, tabling the pop-up newsrooms at community events. So for those watching the stream or watching the replay, if you're interested in partnering in a newsroom, pop-up newsroom, or having us partner on curating one at your location, like, please let us know.
Yeah.
We always find it more authentic if there is a natural fit and a natural partnership, because you care about the community as well, right? Like, working with organizations that understand the need for community narratives, community voice. I mean, which I personally think all nonprofits and foundations and social impact leaders should, but the way that it's actualized looks very different. So if you are interested, please let us know, Philly at generosity.org.
Yes.
We will definitely reach out or reach back out to support that. But, anyways, back to the topic at hand. So, locally, so recently we just had our pop-up partnership with HealthSpark. You hosted or you sat on or led a panel that was amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
You said some really great things, but let's talk about the idea of, I saw a question about NIMBYism. So I mentioned being NIMBY. Like, what is NIMBYism, and how can we overcome that?
Ooh, the first question is easy and the second one is not. So the first, so NIMBY is an acronym. It stands for Not in My Backyard, and it basically refers to the mentality of certain community members to shut out or block certain efforts that would open up their community to elements that they find distasteful. I think in most cases we see NIMBYism as it's applied to the building of homeless shelters or addiction treatment facilities, because of all the harmful narratives surrounding those conditions, there are community
Oh
members who
no,
feel like
just saw
inviting people into
that.
these
Yeah.
spaces will be dangerous. And so, not in my backyard is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's, oh, build this shelter here, invite people in despair into my community. Oh no, not in my
Not in my
backyard.
backyard.
That's NIMBY. That's what that means. And how does one combat an attitude like that? Yo, if we had that answer at the ready, the world would be so different. My take on that solution is, here it comes again, narrative, man, like narrative sovereignty. It is it is only through the cleaving to convenient narratives that these stories are allowed to perpetuate.
Yeah.
I was raised unsheltered, homeless. I was a very cute, very smart little girl sleeping on the streets. And my cuteness and my intelligence and the fact that I was very precocious and had a backpack full of books did not register or matter to any of the people on the street who saw me as an automatic threat because of the way that I looked. It was
Yeah.
clear I was disheveled. I wasn't wearing clean or new clothes. We had obviously looked like we had just woken up from off a park bench because we probably did. And that perception and the sum total of what they were able to glean from those little nuggets of like perception were enough to completely efface any other thing about my character. It was just, we stop here. It doesn't matter what else this person is. They are this. That is
Right.
distasteful. We don't want it. That's why these narratives can kind of perpetuate. But I think narrative is the thing that saves the day, right? Like, there are ways that narrative can harm, but the potential for connection and for understanding and the way that that can bolster humans' capacity for empathy toward one another is unmatched by anything else. So the ability to tell my story face to face to people who maybe would have had one set of perceptions about me changes their perceptions if I'm lucky, right? And it's like, resisting human connection is a very difficult thing to do. You have to work really hard in order to shut that down because I think we're hardwired to receive one another in that way. So you got to really do a lot of sidestepping to feel
It's
nothing.
so funny. My husband and I went grocery shopping the other day, and when we got there, there was like no cars parked where we were parked at. But when we were leaving, there were cars there, and we were all leaving at the same time, like all trying to look. He was like, "I think this is just like the universe. Like, people just want to be be in community. Like, we didn't arrive at the same time, but like, how are we all leaving, bumping into each other, having to talk because we're waiting on each
Yes,
other at the same time?
yes.
He's like, "I'll research this." I'm like, "Have you really?" But, but I think that's to that point, right? Like, it's really
Yeah,
hard, but also I think that going back to, like, the biases, like, that idea of even, like, not in my backyard, I think it's such a harsh narrative, but it's also a narrative that's based on, I almost want, and I could be wrong, but I wanna assume a certain type of narrative around homelessness and unhoused
absolutely.
people, and there is a variety of people, there are even working homeless, right? Like, there are a variety of people who are unhoused that need support. One of the narratives that we discussed during the newsroom was the idea for the tiny house community, right? So
Yeah,
someone was coming in to the newsroom at the House Spark event and was mentioning the idea, or not even the idea, but the fact that, after the encampment that happened on the parkway, that the administration or the previous administration had talked about and put on RFP around creating tiny home communities.
yeah,
And now that's not a thing anymore,
yep,
right?
yeah,
And because that's not solving the issue. And it's like, it's not solving one type of issue, but that
right.
would solve an issue for another type of person that's experiencing homelessness. And I think we just wrap it all up. Like,
We sure
people say
do.
like black people aren't a monolith. Unhoused people are not a monolith. They all
Exactly.
have different issues that they're facing and need different types of supports. How do we break down that monolith?
Opportunities for engagement, like honest, truthful, transparent engagement. Some people need a little bit more exposure to breaking down those monoliths than others, and I think invested people in communities, all the advocates that we meet, um, I think part of our role is helping to facilitate those spaces, helping to create those opportunities for people to have genuine, organic interaction with one another. A big part of it is that, in my opinion, but also by my observation, so I'm being a little careful here, but in my experience, most housed people do not consider the unhoused people in their community to be their neighbors.
Mm,
And that's that right there. Like, that's a big, big part of it. Um, you're speaking about an entire group of people as though they are outside of a community, and now they're problems. Now they are invaders. They are people
right.
who live here, they just can't afford to live indoors like you, and that disqualifies them from the right to even like occupy that space. So they're not your neighbors. They're these like infiltrating things that are ruining your community. You want to use your parks, you're banned from using your beautiful parks and green spaces because now there are people sleeping in these spaces. It's this us versus them
Yeah.
narrative that someone else's despair is harming your quality of life, which I tend to agree is true. There's no peace for anybody unless there's peace for everybody,
Right.
but not in the way that people think. And that all or nothing solution approach doesn't doesn't take into account the fact that yes, there are some conditions out there that need a lot more support in order to end the cycle of homelessness or in order to end the condition. But some people's entire lives could be turned around with like, a period of stable housing, with a period of consistent like food security, with a period like, and not investing in even short-term solutions is kind of saying like, well, if it's all or nothing. If we can't solve the whole problem in one shot, we're just going
Right.
to keep allowing people to suffer and potentially die until we figure out this age-old problem, which is not an acceptable approach in my book.
No.
Not at all.
No. No, not at all, not at all. Are there any local organizations, and maybe not even local, but are there any organizations that you think are doing a great job around this narrative, and around breaking down this monolith?
Hmm. Narrative in particular, the organization that comes to mind isn't local, it's
Mhm,
national. But we had the pleasure of working alongside Marisol Bello at the Health Sparks summit on last Tuesday. And Marisol is the executive director of the Housing Narrative Lab. their entire aim, the whole mission of that organization, of that firm, is to research and apply like proven strategies to helping to shift narrative on housing and homelessness. And the crux of like the core motive for that is to help affect policy in favor of people who need it right now, because it's harmful narratives are doing more than just hurting people's
Yeah.
feelings, right? They're disinvesting folks from real solutions. They're impacting policy and the allocation of funds and resources. And so I would say the Housing Narrative Lab, that is their direct mission, is to apply, research skills, community engagement, forum, survey, like every possible avenue of fact finding that they can to helping to shift and impact this narrative.
Yeah. No, Marisol was amazing. And I was like, we have to do more partnership work with them.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that even, even though I don't want to say they have the lock on housing, but they figured it out, I think
Yep.
that their methodology is applicable
Yep.
beyond just housing. And I think that once we start understanding our own narratives, um, even when we talk about the election, I'm not going to get too deep into that because that's not what we're here for, right? But there are narratives there, and the one thing that, everyone says over and over again is like, you have the people on the left, you have the people on the right, or you have the Democrats, you have the Republicans. It's the people in the middle, right? Like those are the people that you need to talk to, because you're not going to convince the people over there or over there to switch sides,
Right.
but understanding the narrative and understanding or helping them understand their narrative, right? Like how these issues impact them. And I
Right.
think we don't think about that. We don't think about how, I mean, not in my backyard, people think that it's going to, I don't know, bring harm or bring the property values down or whatever the case may be. That's your narrative. But then when you say, well, your property taxes just went up because those tax dollars have to go over here, or like there's other things that are actually impacting your well being that you're not even thinking of.
Yep.
Or maybe you prefer that. I don't know. But again, I think they're over there. But there's
Yeah.
other people that I think that we have to understand what is everyone's narrative. How do we remove the biases from that narrative, and how we bring all the other corresponding narratives together, so that way in the end we can say, here's the holistic picture. Now make the decision, and not
Yep.
just doing it from your one-sided point of view. I think that's very important. And I know that one local organization, and this is kind of a biased comment as well, Pathways to Housing, they actually do a lot of inclusive storytelling, right? So when they're doing their narratives, they are actually sitting down with community members that they serve to understand how they want to be talked about and
Yes.
how they want to be involved. So that way, when they're telling the narratives, right? Like when they're telling narratives to funders or to whoever, they're doing it from a frame of reference of the community and how the community wants to be talked about. And you'll be surprised, like how they've actually like, well, you would think they want to be talked about one way, but they actually like, look, we need money in here, so we want you to talk about us this way, so we can get this money in here, right? Like we understand it, but the thing is that which is sad is like we want you to talk about us in a deficit because we know funders need to hear the deficit to give you money. And it's
Mm,
just like, and it's somewhat heartbreaking, but then also at the same time it's like, okay, you're owning this, we got it,
yeah.
we'll do this because we understand that's you're okay with that, or you understand that, but we're also going to not do that as well because we need to educate people. And I think
Right.
that education is very important in all of this. Very, very important.
We're working toward a world where people don't necessarily have to frame themselves in a deficit in order to get the obvious help and support that they need from their society and government. Like that is why I wake up every day. Like
Yeah,
that's
like
what
we
we can
have
do this
to, like,
work.
and you shouldn't. I mean, and I get like, and not everybody. Like, I really love the approach that they take with working with their community members. But I think that we have to do a better job of, like you said, not thinking about that deficit frame of mind,
Yep.
and thinking that we have to save everybody, and thinking that we
Right.
have to boost ourselves up and put them down in order to cut that check. And I think it starts with narratives. It starts with narrative education. It starts with collecting proper narratives. It starts with just, like you said before, building relationships. Because
Absolutely.
at the end of the day, it becomes very extractive if you're not. So actually
Absolutely.
building those relationships are very, very important.
Yep. That's the through line,
Um,
the solid through line that is never going anywhere, no matter what
Nowhere,
incarnation that takes. It is
not at
always going
all.
to start with relationship building.
So we're coming to the top of the hour. We did want to leave some room for some more questions if you had any. If not, we'll end a little early. But again, like if you or your organization wants to do any narrative workshops or any pop up newsrooms, please feel free to reach out. Also, stay tuned. We're going to try and have these once a month. So we're always going to be here. I don't think this is streaming to Instagram like it's supposed to be, but we're going to figure that out too for the future.
Figure it out.
Because what's interesting about the way we look at our audience and our community, like we know our audience is on LinkedIn, we know our
Yeah.
readers are on LinkedIn, but we also want to make this accessible to the community, right? Because we engage with them, we build relationships. So they're on Instagram and the TikToks. I'm not a TikToker. I tried it for like a day. I was just like, this is too much. But we'll figure it out. It's too much. It's
I
too much
struggle to tell
technology.
all the platforms apart. So I like to just smile and nod in spaces like this because then people can't tell how behind I actually am
Oh,
technologically. I just go, mm-hmm. And I sound like I know what I'm talking about or what you're talking about. And so,
I just thank God I have a teenager because when I say something wrong, she's quick to she's like, "Don't be out here embarrassing me, mom. Let me actually educate you on what this is."
yeah,
She keeps me young and keeps me up to date on everything. So I appreciate that.
yes, yeah, I
Awesome.
try. I definitely try.
Well, if you guys don't have questions, or if you thinking of a question, please feel free to email us. We'll definitely respond back. And until next time, this has been the editor's desk. And if you have any suggestions for future topics or things that you would like Generosity to cover, also please
Mhm.
feel free to email us at philly@generosity.org.
Ooh, also,
Yep.
please email us if you are working on a narrative, if you are ruminating on a story that is important to you that you would like to tell. Please reach out to us. Like I will help you. I will help you brainstorm. We can talk about it. Even if it's not something that you intend to necessarily put out into the world right now, narrative empowerment is about having the tools and being equipped to tell your own story. So if you're just thinking about something or if you have something drafted and you need someone to talk to about it, I invite you to please hit me up.
Yep. And stay tuned for our narrative workshops, where we'll help you with that and teach you that as well. And at the end of that, you can write your own narrative, and it doesn't have to be for Generosity. It can be for any news outlet. But we want to just help start helping people have sovereignty over their narratives.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Narrative sovereignty. Spread it around.
Spread it around, but make sure you credit Dio.
Yes, please.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us on the editor's desk. See you next month.
Bye, everyone.